bring in Rose Cliff founder and managing partner Mike Murphy, also Money Map Press, their chief strategist Keith Fitzgerald, and Kingsview Asset Management chief investment officer Scott Martin. All right, so now we're up 27 points. Hey, guys, and I'll start with you, Scott. How insane is it that we're hanging on every word that drips off of Jay Powell's lips these days?
Nuts. It's too much, and especially given the nature of that interview, Charles. Not yours with Chris Rowe, which was awesome, by the way. It was way better than I thought the interview with Chairman Powell. I mean, it felt like kind of like career day at school type interview to me, watching it at home with the Fed chairman, because, listen, I don't care where the guy rides his bike. I don't care who he took to prom. The reality is you need to ask things like you and Chris talked about the debt ceiling, about the dollar's rally, how the Fed has turned so dovish in a matter of a couple months when, yes, data has weakened, but not terribly so from the October 2nd comments, how they are reacting to this plummeting interest rates in the 10-year note, what they're looking at as far as economic data, government shutdown, how about the dollar's rally, the China trade wars, whatever. Instead, we're just kind of, dancing around the ball here with him. I don't think it was exactly very helpful at all.
Mike, what are your thoughts?
I think I'll agree with Scott. I don't think we need to hang on every word from the Fed governor or from anyone out there, really. But I think it's important to look past that, look past this interview, and see how the market is hanging in there. After rallying 10% since Christmas Eve, the market's hanging in. And I think if you can take an aggressive Fed off the table, I think it makes the path for investing money in this market.
Now, Mike was saying that an aggressive Fed is off the table. Could you say that?
I think you definitely can, because if you listen to Chairman Powell, he's saying we don't have any set plan. We're going to be data dependent. We don't see inflation out there. So there's nothing out there telling you. Remember, Charles, a few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were talking about 3 rate hikes baked in the cake for 2019. I think that's off the table.
You know, Keith, I got to tell you, when I listen to Jay Powell, and I've watched a lot of his speeches, they're not all nationally televised either. It seems like he's proud of the economy, that he takes sort of ownership of it, that the Fed helped to engineer where the U.S. economy is right now. And it seems like he wants to take great pains not to hurt this. So it feels like what I hear him say, and then what I see sometimes policy or the dot plot, they conflict.
Well, look, Charles, he, I believe, wants to do the right thing. He wants to help. But he's also in firm command of the obvious, and it's the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, he says, well, I'm worried about debt. Guess what? You helped create $21 trillion in debt. You're making it more expensive, Chairman Powell. That's what the market's dealing with. They can't have the luxury of academic models, regardless of how he feels. Traders and investors are getting taken on a white-knuckle ride that he is uniquely culpable for.
Scott, he did touch other topics, including tariffs, and saying it's not led to, quote, visible marks on either economy. That's not the narrative that you hear in the media, certainly in the non-financial sector, where you would think that it's crushing our economy.
Yeah, that's not the narrative that I see in the data and comments from companies. I mean, that was odd. And I think, too, guys, look at the Fed's dot plot and some of the comments that they've made about inflation over the last several months. Wage growth, being where it is, employment being where it is, yet not showing up in inflationary numbers. I think that's very interesting. Rallies in things like gold, yet crashes in crude. There's just a lot more substance that I think we could have talked about today with the Fed chairman that wasn't brought up. But to Keith's point, he's right. I mean, the Fed is taking the investor on this crazy kind of white-knuckle ride, I think, to use his term. And that's maybe the problem, Charles, to your question, is the Fed is probably too involved here. Having them step back and be patient, which is a word he used, is very good.
Although, Mike, one big headline coming out of this is that the Fed will, quote, substantially lower that balance sheet. Now, no one knows what the number is. There's some guessing going out right now. So that means we do have to deal with the, pulling out accommodation. We do have to deal with eventually rate hikes. But with respect to these $50 billion a month coming out of the economy, coming out of accommodation, what are your thoughts there? Because the street is having a hard time grappling with that right now.
Yeah, I think the reason we're having a hard time, Charles, is that no one's really experienced this before, at least at this magnitude. So I think the patience word that was uttered several times from the Fed today, I think that's what we need to see with the unwinding of the balance sheet.
Do you read that then, Mike, as being it's not going to be automatic every month, that maybe occasionally we'll pause?
I think you have to have that on the table, because you can't just set something in motion and say, regardless of what happens, reactions to it or data that we're getting, regardless, we're going to do something, anything. That's bad. The market won't like that. So they have to be patient. They have to watch what ramifications come from the unwinding of this.
So, Keith, I'm going to go to you on this. And finally, this white knuckle ride that you talked about. Is it smart or wise in that Jay Powell has been doing these public appearances? We know the October 3rd interview wrecked the market. Feels like, though, he's really worked really hard to make amends. Some people think he was too relaxed today, probably shouldn't have brought up debt at all, and that maybe he did more harm than good.
I'm kind of in that camp, but, the fact that he's acknowledging is a good thing. The best thing, in my opinion, that Chairman Powell could step up and do is say, the buck stops with me. It stops here. All the models in the world don't matter if I don't make a decision. And that's the Fed I want to see. I want to see a Fed that is firmly in command, not a Fed that is casual, a Fed that is lax. He says we will ask questions. The questions are already here. They should have been asked 90 days ago.
All right, gentlemen, thank you all very much, Mike, Scott, and Keith.